Greetings sailors and welcome back to All the Warships and a look at the Paolo Emilio, another work in progress Italian ship. It's a bit of a strange one this because it didn't exist exactly, and it's also the ship that was designed by the community contributors that went to the St. Petersburg conference. When I say designed, you know, it's not like they sat down and worked out every detail, but the concept of it was designed by them, and Wargaming obviously taken that away and come back with this. Now this is going to be a tier 10 like a free XP or a coal or a steel ship, something of that variety. They may or may not also sell it, I have no idea, we never get told stuff like that in advance. But the weirdnesses of this vessel go beyond the SAP and the fuel smoke, the high speed smoke that it shares with the Italian cruisers. Because in real life, well, this ship sort of existed, except it sort of didn't. Once upon a time, Italy built a class of ships, 4 of them out of a planned, I think 12, something like that, called the Capitani Romani class. And they were meant as a counter to the large, heavy, fast French destroyers such as the Mogador. But they called them cruisers, so technically this is a cruiser, except later in life they then kind of changed their mind and called them destroyers or flotilla leaders instead. And because of that weirdness, because it kind of straddles the line between a large, fast destroyer or a very light, fast cruiser, Wargaming have decided to make it a destroyer and give it some of the destroyer advantages. And it also has what is arguably the best armour of a tier 10 destroyer, except, nah, not really. It has a 60mm belt, but it's not a particularly big belt, and it covers less than Khabarovsk's 50mm armour. I, however, don't think, and I might be wrong in this, and this is just going by memory, but I don't think it can get full pens in the way that the Khabarovsk can from AP shells. I think that still remains unique in that regard. So yeah, this ship didn't exist. The Paolo Emilio is the name that was planned for one of the Capitani Romani class cruisers slash destroyers, but it looks kind of similar. It's sort of a, you know, it's a fantasy ship, but it's got the armament of the Paolo Emilio. It's got roughly the speed of the Capitani Romani class ships, and it's got roughly the speed of them. So it seems kind of like a fantasy upgrade of a class of ship that actually existed. So what we have in game as a destroyer at the moment in the testing version is these 135mm guns with the SAP shells. And that makes it, with the rate of fire of these smaller guns, very effective against other destroyers. In fact, it might be more effective just because of the rate of fire than the 8-inch SAP or the 6-inch SAP that you find on the lower tiers, or are going to find on the lower tiers when they are finally available. So it means that you'll be able to land some very heavy hits against destroyers, and so although it does have a very lackluster, if not outright bad, surface detection range for being at tier 10, it's 7.1 kilometers at the moment. If you can get yourself into a position, as I was able to there, where you can just unavoidably whack somebody with those SAP shells over and over again, they're going to be in really serious trouble. Now, it's less effective against higher tier ships, but you still have 25mm of SAP penetration, so it's good enough for superstructure, and it's good enough against the 25mm armour that you'll find on a lot of cruisers. So you can still do some decent damage with the guns, even though they aren't quite as punchy as the 6 and 8-inch guns. But it really is another specialised destroyer hunter in that it just does so much damage against them. Almost to the point where, and I kind of said this with the Montecuculi as well, I think they might need to change or tweak the SAP mechanics a bit. Because, yeah, the bad surface detection helps, and yes, once these ships are properly in-game, people will be a bit more aware of them. Or how effective the SAP can be, because not that many people are at the moment, unless they're following blogs, dev blogs and news posts on the portal and stuff like that. So, you know, you can catch people unawares a bit, but it makes it a very nasty ambush ship against other destroyers. And, well, as you're seeing in this game, the torpedoes can actually be very effective as well. Now, they're slow. 51 knots is certainly slow. They don't particularly pack a big punch. But crucially, you've got a 12-kilometer range plus, I think it's a 1-kilometer detection. You don't get a lot of reaction time with these torps, even though it's pretty slow. You know, you can go almost as fast as the torpedoes. The ship is fast, and the torps are slow. And so, although on paper it looks like the torps aren't very effective, in reality, I've found they actually do pretty well. We're talking about, you know, almost fast reloading deep water torps that aren't deep water torps in terms of how sneaky they are as torpedoes. So in terms of the torps, it's actually way more effective than you would think, almost to the point where I'm thinking they might actually nerf something. Maybe the torp reload, because the torp reload at the moment is 70 seconds. It's fast. And I'm not convinced it needs to be that fast, to be quite honest. I'd almost rather they do that than... like, they could also make them more detectable, give people better reaction times against them. They could nerf the damage, which would leave them being... like, if they had much less damage, they'd be the equivalent of, like, Sims torps at tier 10, which, you know, could still be a niche. But flooding damage is that much less potent than it used to be. So, I don't know. My feeling with the torps is that, yeah, they could stand to be maybe a little less effective. Now, this is going to be one of the better games that I had in terms of torp damage, so maybe my view has been slightly coloured by the fact that I've had some very, very good games overall. But I think this was... the very first game was my very best in terms of actual damage done. So this might have just been a complete fluke. It certainly helped that I had one very good Yamato with me that was basically trusting in my ability to scout ahead of them and spot torps. We also had another Yamato that was absolutely terrible. There's going to be quite a contrast on the team list. One Yamato right at the top of the team and one right at the bottom. So that Shima was really easy prey for my SAP, and I had their smoke to benefit from, which is why I made this run. But I've also got my own smoke, which I'm now going to demonstrate, and that will let me talk about the smoke a little bit, because it's just like the Italian cruiser smoke. You have a limited laying time, but you can lay it at full speed. However, while that works really well for the cruisers, and I really like it on the cruisers, I kind of feel like on a destroyer it doesn't work nearly so well. And at the very least, I think I would like the choice of either having just a bog standard smoke or else this fuel smoke, this high speed smoke. Because as you can see, it's nearly a 3-minute cooldown between uses of the smoke. You get at most 50 seconds because you've got 40 seconds of laying time, and it dissipates in 10 seconds. You can't use the smoke special equipment to extend your laying time at all. That's not fittable to this ship or any of the Italian cruisers overall. So if there is a carrier in play, and this is exactly the same problem that the French destroyers suffer from, if there is a carrier in play, yeah, at least you have a smoke of sorts, but it doesn't last that long. Your AA isn't very good, so they can just pop a fighter over you, or nearby, or, well, they can just come back at you with planes. And because their AA isn't very good, it doesn't matter if they're tier 8 or tier 10 planes, they will come and do a nasty on you. Which makes it quite useful that you have all these hit points. You do have quite a high pool of health, as much as that's like a tier 6 cruiser level of health, something around that. Because if you're sailing along, minding your own business, you know, just having a nice sail and admiring the scenery, and then suddenly some big old mean nasty Midway or even Lexington rocket planes or dive bombers or something come along after you, well, you can easily lose 5, 6, 7, 8k chunks of health at a time. So much like the French destroyers, your effectiveness overall, what you're going to be able to do and how well you're going to be able to do it, is heavily influenced by if there is a carrier in play or not. But unlike the French destroyers, this at least doesn't have a rather horrid air detection range. Although, I have to say, the French cruisers do. Some of the French cruisers have air detections basically as bad as their surface detections, which I do wonder is supposed to somehow reference, you know, what happened at Taranto, the Royal Navy making a carrier strike against the Regia Marina, and being somewhat effective at doing so. Anyway, that was that game. 169,000, almost all of it from the torpedoes, although I was able to use the guns rather successfully as well. It can be quite a fun, aggressive ship to play if you have cooperative teammates, and in that game it definitely helped that I had that Yamato, who was at the top of the team, in fact, pushing up. And then we have the other Yamato, as I say, completely dead last. But yeah, I've also had plenty of games where it's struggled rather a bit more, and carrier games, as I say, can be just a blight on your happiness, just as they are with French destroyers. You can at least pop your smoke, but then of course if they come back to where they know your position is now, and your smoke is now on a 3-minute cooldown just about, well, at that point you are completely out of luck, and your only option is to try and get into friendly AA cover if there is some nearby. So overall it's an interesting ship, but I do feel it needs some tweaks before it comes to us in a live form. And like I say, I really would like at least the option for the player to choose whether they want the fuel smoke or the regular smoke, because it would actually represent quite a different choice in play styles. Regular smoke would be a hell of a lot more useful for games with carriers, whereas the fuel smoke would be more the high risk option, but it would also let you do things that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise be able to do, in the same way that you know, sometimes you can use that get out of jail free card to maneuver with the cruisers. So this one I may or may not come back to with another video, but we'll see. I'm definitely going to be keeping tabs on this one. It is an interesting concept overall, and when it's enjoyable, it really is quite enjoyable. So hopefully you have found this video interesting, and if you have, you can do all the usual things down underneath it. And of course, as always, stay tuned for more.